Why, hello there, everyone. Sorry about the shaky camera. There we go. Trying to set it up beautifully so you can see right out of my window is Lucas Oil Stadium. Huh? Cool. Only the best from Hubbard Broadcasting. Am I right? Well, we're here. It's really just me. So I'm here at the NFL Combine, and already a lot of news to talk about from today with Adrian Peterson. So I would like to get everyone's thoughts. If you want to send some messages along, you want to send some questions, you want to send some comments, I am here to answer those questions and comments. So I've got my little iPad set up here. I've got this set up here, and we're going. So anytime you want to send along a message, a question, a comment, I'll be reading them here, so I'll be kind of going back and forth reading them, and we can talk a little bit of Vikings here. So I want to start. Okay, now we're good. My mistake. Okay, well anyway, so I want to start off. Sorry, I'm a disaster a little bit, but I'm here. Talking about Adrian Peterson a little bit, which is my thoughts on what happened today with the team making it official that they are not picking up his team option. Well, it couldn't be any more obvious than that, right? That they weren't going to pick up the team option. There I go. Yes, thank you, Jesse. My mistake. Had it turned to the side. I'm a rookie when it comes to Facebook Live. Give me a break, everybody. All right, so anyway, so I get the email from the Vikings. They say they're not picking up the team option for Adrian Peterson, and I scroll my way through the statement from Rick Spielman, and the first thing that stands out to me is that Rick Spielman wasn't saying, "Hey, Adrian Peterson, thanks for the memories, bye-bye," but he was saying, well, now we'll see if we can get a different deal done. And then Adrian Peterson and his side comes out, and it's a little bit of the same thing. Hey, let's see if maybe we can get something else done. And from my standpoint, I think it's time and the right time for the Vikings to move along from Adrian Peterson and be done with him as their top back, as their face of their franchise, and so forth. Because not only is it about the age curve for him and the fact that he's 32 years old, but it's really about allowing the franchise to move forward with a different offensive philosophy, with Pat Shurmur and with Sam Bradford and the two receivers, Stefon Diggs and Adam Thielen, and making those guys the faces of your franchise as opposed to Adrian Peterson for so long. And then there's also the fact that, I mean, you can say that he's still Adrian Peterson and he still might be capable of magical things, but let's just be realistic here. I mean, not just the fact that he's 32 years old, but the fact that he was injured as well over this last year, that he was hurt and that he didn't get the type of playing time that we would have liked to see to know better whether he could still play or not. But with the injury to go along with the age, it just doesn't seem like a very smart play. So I'd love to see any of your thoughts who are watching. Feel free to drop in a comment there. I would be very interested to see if how everybody else is reacting to Adrian Peterson. Also, from the Combine here, I've got some things that I jotted down that'll be very interesting to watch at the Combine. Trust me, I'm not going to read you names that you've never heard of. That drives me nuts. Do you guys follow anybody on Twitter or Facebook who's a real draft nut? And they just tell you, they throw names at you, and you say, okay, well, this guy from Western Kentucky State, although the guy from Western Kentucky actually has a pretty memorable name, Forrest Lamp. You're not going to forget that one. Forrest Lamp is a guy to watch. He's projected to go around the second round. He's supposed to be a very good guard, somebody that the Vikings could be interested in. But put Forrest Lamp aside. I won't throw any wild, crazy names at you that you've never heard when I'm talking about the Combine. So if you've got any questions, you've got any thoughts about the offseason, about Adrian Peterson, if you think I'm crazy for saying that now is a really good time to move along from Adrian Peterson, feel free to let me know. If you have any Indianapolis questions or you want to look outside, I can show you guys outside. A couple things I'm thinking about, though. One of them is the running back class. And it was very interesting to me sitting in with Rick Spielman to listen to him talk about the running back class. And this goes to the question here of what will the Vikings do free agency or toward the draft. When Rick Spielman said earlier this week that he thought this running back class was the best he'd ever seen, I mean, immediately I thought, okay. I mean, this has to mean that the Vikings are really thinking about picking a running back in this draft. And if you look at this one, it's very unique in the fact that there could be 2, maybe even 3 running backs taken in the first round, which could leave some pretty darn good players in the second round for the Vikings, which, I mean, it would make so much sense to move on from the old, bring in the new, in a draft class that is very deep at the running back position. It seems, though, in a way, a little like, hey, this is a position that we've been talking about being devalued in the league, and now you're saying to spend your top draft pick on it. But if it's a playmaker, someone who's dual threat and would fit in Pat Shurmur's system, I think it's a great idea to go with a running back. So I'm very interested this week to see how that all plays out, to see where the running backs shuffle out and where your draft experts, Mike Mayock and Mel Kiper and Todd McShay, where they rank everybody in terms of the draft for running backs after the combine, because that's kind of when things start to become a little more solidified. Do I think that they'll get someone in free agency? It's possible, but the free agent list, I tweeted it out a little earlier, right? I mean, running back free agent lists are never all that impressive. Latavius Murray from Oakland, he's okay. Jacquizz Rodgers had a pretty good year for the Bucs last year after Doug Martin went, but there isn't a running back out there who you would say, okay, AP out, this guy in, don't miss a beat, just keep on rolling. I don't think there's that guy there. So they'll probably, if I were to guess, I would say draft one, second, third round, or pick up one in free agency. Maybe it's a bigger name, or maybe it's a guy that you don't know, but I could see them going in both ways. The best fit for running back in the draft, I like Wayne Gallman. And I'm sorry to do that, to throw out a name if people don't know him, but I think they will, because he was the running back from Clemson, who was the starter. You had Deshaun Watson, Mike Williams, the wide receiver. Both of those guys are locks to go in the first round. But I was always impressed by Gallman. He's kind of a bigger guy, taller, upright sort of runner, and he can do it all. He can run out of the backfield. He can catch. He's kind of that dual threat. I'll be interested to see where he shakes out. Right now, he's talked about as being a guy who could go toward the second round. I'm intrigued by him, but there's lots of names out there. Dante Foreman is one guy, and Kareem Hunt. So there's lots of different names out there that you're going to hear as we get closer and closer to the draft. But Gallman, I know, maybe because he was playing in the national championship, caught my eye, but he really did. I thought he was very good. Moving Joe Berger to guard is an idea that I really like, but I don't know if I like the idea of signing Nick Mangold. I mean, that guy's a Jets legend. It would be kind of like the Jets talking about signing Adrian Peterson, where they would be like, yay, we're getting Adrian Peterson. And we would be like, sort of, right? But not the same Adrian Peterson you're thinking of. The same is probably true for Nick Mangold, that at one time he is dominant. He is one of the best in the league. But last year, looking a little bit into it, just pulled up what's great about the NFL is you can just pull up a game here or there and just watch it back on tape on the NFL's website. Nick Mangold did not look exactly like the old Nick Mangold, did not look dominant as he was before. Pro Football Focus did not give him a very good rating last year. But I do like the idea of moving Joe Berger to guard and getting a center, because there's a couple of centers in this draft who are supposed to be worthy of stepping right in and starting, and there's a couple in free agency that might be able to slide in and play that role. So unless you're talking about paying out big bucks for a guard, centers come a lot cheaper, so you might be able to get a center instead, move him over to guard, and then spend your money on those tackles. Good question, Brandon. Thank you. Would it be a shock if they ended up losing Thielen and Patterson? Yes, it would be a shock. Be a huge shock. Thielen, not Patterson. If they decide to move on from Patterson, it's because of the price. There's a possibility that Patterson could be looking for Tavon Austin type money, which I wouldn't blame him for, since Tavon Austin got that type of money, and there's some similarities there with their stats. But with Thielen, I think it is possible that someone gives him an offer sheet. But the Vikings would probably match that. They're also going to put a tender on him, which means that if a team signs him, they have to give away a draft pick. I think it's a realistic possibility, and that teams will make the phone call about Thielen, because if you look at the wide receiver crop, Kenny Stills, Kenny Britt, anyone else named Kenny? There aren't that many guys who are really impressive or nowhere near what Adam Thielen did last year. But I think whatever a team put on Adam Thielen for an offer sheet, the Vikings would just match to make sure he stuck around. Thoughts on Jamaal Charles? Would be similar to my thoughts on Adrian Peterson. Both have not been in the lineup very often over the last couple of years, and both were elite during their time. But I want to move on to the younger guys. If I'm getting a free agent back, I want him to be just coming off that rookie deal or RFA deal, whichever, depending on the situation. I want him to be just coming off that, and then pick him up at age 25, 26, 27 at the absolute latest. I wouldn't want to be picking up a guy who is in his 30s, because a lot of times you're going to end up with that Shaun Alexander effect. You're going to end up with either ineffective play or an injury. So I would be very worried about picking up Jamaal Charles. Cordarrelle Patterson, let's see. With Cordarrelle Patterson having a good shot of being out the door, do we just put Marcus Sherels at kick returner? Kick returner, the Vikings have had the best kick and punt returners over the last few years. And it's been a nice benefit, especially last year early in the season. It helped them out a ton. And then the Arizona game where Cordarrelle Patterson ran one back for a touchdown. But I don't really worry so much about it. There are a few guys, historically, Patterson is one of them, who have been really special at kick returning. And Sherels seems to have the same thing with punt returning. But beyond that, you're kind of just guessing and who's going to be really good and who's not. And it's a lot of small sample sizes. It's a lot of luck. It's how often you get called for a block in the back. So I'm not saying that Patterson isn't exceptional, but I think they have devalued the kick return so much that he only gets a handful of shots per year, that maybe at one time in his career, that position would have been way more valuable. So whoever they put back at kick returner, I'm kind of indifferent. It's like you have to just keep trying people. I would certainly try Sherels first because he has that punt return skill. But your guess is as good as mine of which guy is going to be great at it and which guy might not be. How about signing 2 tackles in free agency, drafting a center and a guard in the draft? Yeah, I think that the tackles will probably have to come in free agency. I don't see any tackles in this draft that are just going to be picked and thrown right in. I mean, maybe Cam Robinson from Alabama could do it. He could be put right in. But I don't know if you really want to do that and take that risk, because we've seen guys who are drafted number 1 overall who struggle right out of the gate. And guys who are extremely high draft picks that are great prospects, and then they have a lot of trouble or even become a bust. So I think what you want to do here with the Vikings is you want to find 2 tackles who are proven. That could be a lot harder to do with the left tackle than the right tackle, although I would be for. I went back and watched some Russell Okung, which you've gotten deep into the offseason when you're going back and watching Russell Okung. But I went back and watched, and I know there was the report from Jason La Canfora that the Vikings are interested in him. I think they should be. If he was put in, I think he gives you average left tackle play, which would be a huge upgrade from what they had last year. Everybody is going to want Andrew Whitworth. He's going to have the hottest agent come March 9th or March 7th when they can technically start talking to free agents. But Whitworth can only sign with one team, so if it isn't the Vikings, then your backup option, I think number 2 should be Okung. My number 3 option would also be Riley Reif, to move him back from right tackle to left tackle, because I think he can give you average play over there as well. The right tackle's got a few more guys. Rick Wagner is the one that's at the top of the list, but there's a few more guys who might at least be able to fill in over at that position. I would feel more confident that they're able to get a right tackle. The left tackle, that's the one. that could be a little harder. They might have to give Russell Okung a lot of money up front for a 1-year deal, 2-year deal, or something like that to come to Minnesota, because that has to be solved. There is no backup plan right now. It can't be TJ Clemmings again. From Nick here, can the Vikings risk not signing guys to fill one of their holes on the O-line, assuming whichever spot they don't fix will be their draft pick? Well, I think what they can do, other than the center position, I wouldn't want to rely on even a guard to have to start if it's a second-round guard. I did a little research on this, and I found that the guards and tackles who were asked to start right away as rookies that weren't first-round picks often had a lot of trouble. They rarely got very good Pro Football Focus ratings. There's a couple other stats out there that you can look toward, and it was pretty clear that maybe in their second, third, fourth year, those players got better, but their first year was pretty tough. So the center position's a little bit different. I think guys can step in and play right away. So if you were going to do it that way, if you were only going to fill those tackle positions, I would say draft the center, maybe second, third round, a guy that you can plug right in. Latavius Murray is kind of interesting to me. I've never thought of him as being a great running back, but if you look at what Oakland did last year, they're really interesting to me because they combined 3 running backs to have like Ladainian and Tomlinson. If one running back had the same year that the 3 running backs in Oakland had, the guy would be MVP. But they just mixed it in. It's almost like having a lefty-righty thing in baseball and maybe combine the lefty and righty guy hit 30 home runs, but since this guy had 20 and this guy had 10, it doesn't feel like you had an all-star at that position. But I wouldn't mind him being one of 3. Maybe you draft one and you've got Jerick McKinnon. I still feel good about Jerick McKinnon. I thought last year that he was misused at times, and I thought last year was a lot to do with the offensive line. But his 2 previous seasons, McKinnon was explosive and could catch out of the backfield. I like having him as one of 2 or one of 3, and I wouldn't mind having Latavius Murray either. He can catch a little bit. He's a bigger guy. He's got size and power, and he's not too old. I think he might be 26, 27, so I wouldn't mind it. And here's the thing with any of these running backs, they're not going to get paid a lot. I mean, based on the reported price for Eddie Lacy, which is $2 million a year, whatever running back you want, including Lacy, I guess, you should be able to get at a fairly reasonable price, which, by the way, would be another reason not to bring back Adrian Peterson at $6 million a year when the next guy could come in at 2. But Murray, I would be a yes on Murray if it's something like 2 years, $5 million or something like that. Do I see anybody else getting released soon? That's a really good question. Brian Robison, my guess is that he will restructure his contract. I don't think that they're going to straight up release Brian Robison unless he says he doesn't want to restructure the contract. But I think he will. He's been with Minnesota for so long. He understands that his role is kind of shifting over to Danielle Hunter. So my guess is that he will. That would be my first thought for a guy who could get released. And my second one is Sharif Floyd if they don't trade him. But if it's me, I would just keep Sharif Floyd in place. That's what I would do. I think Sharif Floyd is a really good player, so I would just want him to keep playing if he's healthy. And that's the thing, that Mike Zimmer was very frustrated by the fact that he hasn't been healthy, and if Zimmer does not trust him, then I guess you might have to move on. Releasing him would create $6.7 million in cap room. That's a lot. That could be another player. There's a possibility that they could sign another defensive tackle, move Lindvall Joseph to the 3 technique, and then you kind of got a little bit of a different look up front. But I would prefer that Sharif Floyd just stay on the team. But that would be my other guess. If they were going to release somebody, maybe Sharif Floyd. Keep the questions going, people. I'm enjoying this very much. From Scott, would rather sign Khalil on the cheap and then sign Wagner and Lang if the cap room is needed. Yeah, with Khalil, he's a tough one for me because I don't really buy into the logic that Rick Spielman used, that he was getting better and that he was getting more consistent. I think in 2014, he was one of the worst players in the league. And then in 2015, he was still well below average at his position, and they were hoping that he was going to be the player he was his rookie year again. And that's just a lot of hope for me from something that was a long time ago, and now he's coming off of a hip surgery. I have a really tough time believing that Matt Kalil would come back and be really, really good. Now, the thing is, if you were talking about a front-loaded deal, a one-year deal, kind of a prove-it type of contract that the Vikings could get out of easily, and there was no better solution, that you couldn't get Okung and you couldn't get Whitworth and you couldn't get Reef and move him over to the left tackle, then I would say yes, bring back Matt Kalil and throw quick. Because, one of the things, I was going back and watching some of his 2015 season, which you could tell I have a great social life for all the NFL film that I've been watching this offseason. But, what I noticed was that Matt Kalil was often asked to block for a long time under Norv Turner's system. A lot of 7-step drops, the play actions, 3 seconds or more to throw the ball for Teddy Bridgewater. I don't believe that's going to be the case. I think it'll be very similar to what we saw this year, where it's going to be a lot of quick drops, get the ball out fast, West Coast. That's what Pat Shurmur does. So maybe that would take a little bit of the pressure off of Matt Kalil and help him perform a little bit better. I think that's the best you could hope for. To me, it's the press in case of emergency Matt Kalil button. But here's the thing you have to worry about. There's a bunch of other teams on the market for these left tackles. Maybe because he's got the pizza shops and he lives here that maybe he really wants to come back to Minnesota. That's possible. But if he's not dead set on coming back to Minnesota, you could see a bunch of other teams wanting to put down better offers for Matt Kalil, and you end up getting left in the cold. What else we got here? With the cap room available, with AP gone, you think the Vikings will make at least one huge splash signing a top-notch offensive lineman? Well, I think if they have the chance to sign Andrew Whitworth, they will. I think even if it took $14 million over 2 years, per year for 2 years or something really crazy. Whitworth is that good. Pro Football Focus had him rated as the second best, and watching him back, the guy is a monster. You're talking about somebody who just does not allow pressure on his quarterback, as opposed to what you saw last year, which was every other play there was pressure on the quarterback between the two tackles. Whitworth would solidify that position for at least 2 years, and you would know you had one of the best in the league. I would not be surprised at all if they decided to throw a bunch of money at him. Now, could they throw a bunch of money at any other position if they get the left and right tackles solidified? Now, that's interesting because the Joe Berger to guard move, that's kind of my thought, but I haven't heard that from anyone. I haven't heard that that's what they're thinking. So you've got Kevin Zeitler and TJ Lang out there, Larry Warford. You've got 3 great guards that are probably going to command around $10 million per year. It would not surprise me at all for a team that was dead last in running to react and spend $10 million a year on one of those guys who's worth it. Keep that in mind. They are worth it. They're that good. But that would be a lot. I could see that splash coming, though, on the offensive line. Robison going to restructure. Was surprised that he scored so low on PFF. Yeah, I was a little bit until I kind of looked into the score. They said, PFF, and I would agree with this, that he was fairly effective as a pass rusher and that he was not so effective as a run stopper. And I would agree with that. I think that the Vikings as a whole were not that effective stopping the run. They had some really big games against them. You remember how well Frank Gore ran against them toward the end of the season. But even that Monday Night Football game in Chicago where Jordan Howard ran all over them, Washington, when they were up in that game, ran all over them. So they had some pretty rough games when it came to stopping the run, which I think brought down some of their scores, and maybe especially Brian Robison's. And if you think about this too, if you've got a guy whose main role is to just come in and rush the passer, that's going to be his focus, and I think sometimes that will hurt a run grade because that's going to be what he's really going after. My friend Carter Wetmore, yeah, I'll call you a friend, Carter. the right place to watch for the NHL trade deadline. Carter, I will take your NHL trade deadline questions. I've got NHL analysis for anybody who wants it. Good trade by the Wild. Great game last night, by the way. Let's see. Don't want to see Clemmings take another snap in the NFL. I have a tough time disagreeing with you. I hate to be the person who says he's not an NFL player, but in order to get to a replacement level, like just an average backup, he would have to go way up. That's how poor it was last year. There are some people that I've talked to who think that there are some physical tools there, but you shouldn't ever be all the way at the bottom, worst at your position in the entire league. That doesn't speak well for your chances of getting much better. I've seen guys go from mediocre to really good, but I don't know if I've ever seen a guy go from completely incompetent. I mean, that would be like a quarterback going from Christian Ponder to even good, like average. And it just doesn't happen very often in pro sports. We kind of talk ourselves into these things sometimes, like, oh, well, he could just get better. And teams do that all the time with players that they draft. Oh, he can get better. He's got the tools. And then, eventually reality hits, and that just does not happen. Keep the questions coming, by the way. I am enjoying them very much. Let's see. Vikings have a chance to get some decent comp picks in 2018 if they don't cancel them out with signing their own free agents that affect who they go after. I say no. Decent, yes, but those comp picks are never like so good that they should influence what you do. Just a good example would be Josh Norman. The comp pick for compensation, that is, for Josh Norman is a third rounder. I mean, are you not signing a guy because, what are you getting for Cordarrelle Patterson? A fourth rounder, a fifth rounder? Are you not signing a guy because you're going to tack on a fifth rounder the next year? Probably not. So I wouldn't make that really any part of my consideration. From Jason, do you think that we will stick with McKinnon and Asiata, try to pick up a free agent? If so, who? Well, Matt Asiata is a free agent. And I would guess, now I don't know because Asiata has his whole career here and I think he's liked, but I would guess that Matt Asiata is not back with the team next year. McKinnon, I think, is a part of the franchise going forward because I think that, I wouldn't say he gets a complete pass for last year, but I think everyone feels that there's more in there than we saw last year, mostly because of the offensive line. And here's another thing, too, just as an aside, that when I looked up kind of the splits of his yards per carry, and when he was run out of the I form, he ran 9 times for 1 yard. And all his other runs, he was near 4 yards per carry. So it was kind of like, why were they using him out of the I form? That's not really Jerick McKinnon's thing, and that's maybe one of those elements of the offense that gets corrected. But I do think that they will try to bring somebody in. I like the idea of Jacquizz Rodgers because he can catch out of the backfield, and he's kind of quick. He had a ton of catches when he played for Atlanta, and then showed a little more running ability this year with the Bucs when he kind of took over as one of their main backs when Doug Martin struggled. I like the idea of going after him is probably the top target for me as someone who could be a part of a three-headed monster with a rookie that you draft, McKinnon, and then possibly Rodgers. But someone else brought up Latavius Murray earlier. I think he's a fine target. I would love the idea of Eddie Lacy and split those two roles up into this is your ground and pound guy and this is your come out of the backfield guy, your quick back. I mean, that's what New England did last year with LeGarrette Blount, and I wouldn't mind that at all if that was Eddie Lacy for the Vikings. I think that's an upgrade from trying to do that with Adrian Peterson. Manti Te'o, last year's hurt, but the year before, it seemed like he was starting to make some progress in the league. Audie Cole and Emmanuel Lamar did not show that they can really be counted on. I think that Washington game really showed that. So I'm with you for getting another linebacker. I'm interested to see Kentrell Brothers, if he's the guy that they make the Chad Greenway role, because my guess is that Chad Greenway is going to announce his retirement sometime pretty soon. I think the Vikings expect that before we even get to free agency. So sometime within the next couple of weeks here, or week and a half or so, we should find out that Chad Greenway's retiring. And so who's going to be that next linebacker? If they added one, I think that's a good idea. Do I think the Vikings will be interested in signing a corner? Yes, I think it is possible that they could be interested in signing a corner if they don't bring Captain Munnerlyn back, which there might be some rumblings about that this week. Captain Munnerlyn himself told reporters that he's interested in coming back. I know they always say that, but I think with Captain you kind of believe it, and that he would start to find out around this time, around the combine, is when his agent was going to meet with the Vikings, and he would have a little more clarity. If not, there's a bunch of cornerbacks. I wrote about this at 1500ESPN.com if you want to check it out. It's somewhere amidst 14 Adrian Peterson articles, but it's in there. There's a lot of cornerbacks who the Vikings might be interested in. Gerard Powers is one of them. Sterling Moore is another one. Guys who are nickel corners that might be able to fill that spot. Any chance Anthony Barr gets more pass rushing opportunities? Coverage was not his strength. Yeah, Jesse, I agree with you on that. And I think that's one of the biggest things that they have to figure out this offseason, right? Is what is the deal with Anthony Barr in his last year? Because his play really fell off a cliff, and part of it, I think, was because other teams started to figure out what his weaknesses were, and they started to attack the middle of the field as opposed to going after the two cornerbacks, especially Xavier Rhodes. You're kind of eliminating Xavier Rhodes. You also don't want to throw where Harrison Smith is. So now who are you looking at for a weak spot? Well, it turned out to be Anthony Barr a lot of the time. And I think that was part of the reason his play fell off. I think it's probably wise to have him be more of a pass rusher. I've even kind of thrown the idea out there of switching to a 3-4. It would be a huge change, but if you're going to move on from Sheree Floyd, maybe that's an idea to put Barr then at that outside linebacker, speed rusher position. I don't know how that messes with Danielle Hunter. It could end up being a disaster and blow up in everybody's face. But if you're talking about him being in a position where he could maybe move around like Jadeveon Clowney does and just rush the passer, that's intriguing to me with the way that he really struggled. But then you've got to find somebody else to play in his full-time linebacker position in the middle. So it's tricky. I think that Barr's play falling off is one of the toughest things for them to figure out this offseason and how they're going to deal with it. Will the Vikings sign a veteran quarterback as a backup? How many McCowns are available? Are there multiple McCowns? I think there actually are. Yes, I think that they should sign a backup quarterback if they have that opportunity. I wouldn't be surprised if they draft one in the 6th or 7th round just to take that swing, though it very rarely works out. Get used to hearing that so-and-so is the next Dak Prescott, but usually nobody's the next Dak Prescott. It's really Dak Prescott and Tom Brady are the only quarterbacks since Tom Brady came in the league that were drafted after the 4th round that became really good. So at least off the top of my head, I can't think of too many who were drafted late. So every team is like, well, take that swing, and then they do, and then it doesn't really matter. But to the point, yes, a backup quarterback. I don't know. What's Matt Schaub doing? Matt Castle's still around, everyone. You excited? No? Okay. Well, Matt Castle would be another guy who, what you need is, if Sam Bradford gets hurt and can't play for 4 games, you need to win 2. So look at it like that. Landry Jones, can he win you 2? Can Matt Castle win you 2? I don't know if he can. Can Matt Schaub win you 2? I don't know if he can either. But we don't know what they have with Taylor Heineke because he hurt himself last year and then barely got any reps when it got to the regular season. Given Zim's love for defensive backs, any interest in Jarius Byrd? I covered Jarius Byrd in Buffalo, and he's a player. At least back then he was, but now, I don't know. He's a real ball hawk, but I feel like the Vikings are set where they are with Sendejo and Smith. A couple of years ago, Sendejo, he was kind of the whipping boy, kind of the, you'll never be as good as Harrison, and he struggled at times. But this year I thought he was solid. Could I see them wanting possibly another safety? Yeah, and a veteran guy taking a long shot swing on somebody who's always been a playmaker, I'm for it if no one else is going to throw him a ton of money. Yeah, because last year the depth at that position was a big problem. When Anthony Harris or Jaron Curse was forced to go in the game, it was not great. They were switching in and out all over the place. In fact, I thought that Terrence Newman should have been the guy that played safety when one of those two went down, either Sendejo or Smith, and that really hurt the defense overall. So depth at safety, yes. Anything different the Vikings can do to be more proactive in avoiding the injury bug? Boy, if you know that, you'd earn a lot of money. But I mean, I can say this: they do a lot of the same things that other teams do in terms of tracking and stuff like that with their players, and they've invested in health analytics and things like that. I believe. I know the Wild have for sure, and I believe the Vikings have too. But I mean, what are you supposed to do, really? Could you give them more knee braces? I mean, I really don't know. I would have to look and see if one team gets more injured than another. I would say those staffs really matter for keeping players on the field, but trying to figure out which ones are good at it and which ones aren't, I think is really tricky by just looking at injuries, because so many injuries are just a guy fell on you. What about Teddy Bridgewater? Is he going to announce his retirement soon as well? I don't think he's going to announce his retirement soon. I do think there's a chance that he doesn't play again. And what's kind of tipped me that way is the fact that we just haven't heard anything from Teddy Bridgewater. In the locker room, he refused to talk. Rick Spielman, Mike Zimmer, anytime we've asked any of them, they've said, sorry guys, we don't really know. We don't have a timeline. And that injury, you don't know how he's going to come back, Teddy Bridgewater. And just unfortunate because I think he was on a really good path, and then he goes down with that injury, and it's not like he could just bounce right back up and be back in the lineup this year. Nick Foles, yeah, sure. I mean, when you start naming backup quarterbacks, it's like, well, let's see, Mark Sanchez, all right. I mean, I'm not a fan, of course. I'm not a fan of Nick Foles either, but somebody you can just throw in there and won't ruin everything, won't be a complete disaster. Mark Sanchez might be a complete disaster, but yeah, all right. Do you think the Vikings will swing a trade for an offensive lineman? If they have to. Initially, this was my idea. I went into the offseason thinking trade for an offensive lineman. I love that idea. But now that Russell Okung is out there, that I would prefer them go that way for a 1 or 2 year fix if he's willing to come to Minnesota. And if not, Joe Staley is the guy. Joe Thomas, I think, is going to be staying in Cleveland. No one knows for sure, but it kind of is leaning that way, or at least it seems like it has been, that he's going to stay in Cleveland. Joe Staley from the San Francisco 49ers has a big contract. He's under contract a long time, I think through like 2022. So it's a long deal, and San Francisco might want to get out from under it. But judging by some of their early moves under John Lynch, they went out and signed some people pretty quick. You might be looking at a GM in Lynch who thinks that he can turn that team around pretty quick. Maybe they want, I don't know, Jay Cutler or something, and they want to get back to being, I know, sorry, don't laugh. I said Jay Cutler to San Francisco. But let's just say they want Jay Cutler, and they want to sign a bunch of free agents, and they want to get good fast. Well, then, in that case, they're not going to be trading Joe Staley. And that would leave you with almost nobody on the trade market to go out and get who's any good. Jason Peters' name was out there early in the offseason, but then that kind of quickly went away because Jason Peters is really, really good, and that's what tends to happen when they're really, really good. They kind of throw out a trade rumor to get a guy a little nervous or try to get him to renegotiate a contract, and then it gets done when it's somebody who's a very good player. So you got Joe Thomas basically off the market, Jason Peters off the market, possibly Joe Staley off the market. Well, that means to me that you're either trying to pick up someone who's really failed for another team and they want to move on from him, or you're talking about just canning that deal altogether, canning the idea of going after a trade for a left tackle. I mean, I like the thought, but it's starting to kind of be like, well, who are you actually going to trade for? Let's see. I thought you were Marcus Johns from Vine when I first saw the feed pop up. I don't know who that is, and I'm sorry for that if that's a really cool person. Let's see. Anyway, what is the status of Matt Khalil? Everyone fell off his bandwagon. Well, Matt Khalil, well, thank you, by the way, for the question. Matt Khalil, the status, at least according to Rick Spielman, well, first of all, there's a report that his hip is going to be healed in time for OTAs. So it sounds like he's back in halfway decent shape and should be ready to go, that there won't be any long-term issues with the injury. But the way Rick Spielman talked when we met with him, it sounded a lot like they think that Matt Khalil can bounce back to what he was a couple of years ago. I always have trouble with that, especially when it comes to football. When it's baseball or something, like nothing really happened to a guy's body from age 25 to 26. Sure, he could bounce back to, maybe he just had a down year. But with football, usually when they go down, they don't come back up because it usually has to do with the guy's physical condition. Maybe Matt Khalil is healthy for the first time. Spielman said that coming into last year's training camp, they were as happy as they'd ever been with him, whatever that means. But they were really confident in him. And so he was talking like, yeah, Matt Khalil might be coming back, guys. I wouldn't be surprised if that's the outcome that happens. And the way I look at it is this. If Matt Khalil is your left tackle, you are not dead last in the league, so you're better than you were last year. But it's not problem solved. Unless he does somehow find 4 years ago, the way he played, it's just okay. It's just a place filler until you can get a real franchise left tackle. Let's see. What name are we not talking about that will have an impact next year, free agent or current roster? That's a good question, Jason, and I'm going to have to think about that for a minute. I guess, a guy that we haven't talked about really a lot in the offseason in any way, shape, or form is Trey Waynes. I know that he's not like an under-the-radar type of name, but Trey Waynes might end up taking a full-time gig next to Xavier Rhodes. And if you remember with Xavier Rhodes coming into this year, I think we felt like he was real good, but then we walked out of this year looking at him like one of the elite corners in the league. So seeing where Trey Waynes could go next season if he's given that full-time job would be pretty interesting. Free agent is a good one, and I don't know. I'm going to have to think about that. A free agent that could make an impact on potentially this roster. How about Rex Burkhead? How about that name? He's a running back from Cincinnati who only got kind of a little bit of a chance, but was really good when he did. So that's the guy, Rex Burkhead. That's a like running back name right there, old school. Let's see. I think Sharif Floyd gets traded. The Sharif Floyd situation is really fascinating because he is a stupendously talented player when he's in, but he has not been in consistently enough, and I think it's driven Mike Zimmer up the wall. That would be the only reason for me to trade him. He might be valuable, though, and there are some other defensive tackles that could be picked up. Lindvall Joseph is such a beast that he can play almost every down. It's just, if it's not Floyd next to him, it's got to be someone better than Shamar Stefon. So they would have to go out on the free agent market and pick up somebody. If there's another three-technique guy that they like out there that they could put next to Lindvall Joseph, and Sharif Floyd has trade value, a former first-round pick who's played very well and kind of just ended up in the doghouse, I mean, I would not be against that at all. Trading Sharif Floyd. I like Sharif Floyd and think he's a very good player. So I wouldn't be like jumping for joy if they did it. But if you were talking about replacing him in free agency, paying a lot less, creating some money for yourself, and then picking up an asset too, possibly to move back in the first round, just saying, maybe. There's a lot of possibilities there, and it's interesting to talk about. Is Laquan Treadwell going to get more playing time this year, or is he going to end up like Cordarrelle Patterson? Well, there will be a new wide receivers coach, so I do not know yet how that will affect Laquan Treadwell. Treadwell is a really interesting case because I believe Rick Spielman when he says that Treadwell is working extremely hard, because I've seen that myself after practice when everybody else is off the field. Laquan Treadwell's one of the last guys out there, and I don't think he's doing it for show. I think he's doing it in earnest because he is a hard worker, and I've talked to some people, his wide receivers coach at Ole Miss, who said the same thing, that he's very committed and serious about being a good NFL wide receiver. But I could be very committed and serious to jumping up on the top of Lucas Oil Stadium. It doesn't mean it's going to happen. And I wonder about Treadwell's ability to learn. I wonder about the fact that he runs a 4.6. And it's kind of tough as a wide receiver in the NFL today. I wouldn't say that it ruins your chances of being great, but you really have to be good at everything else. If you're going to run a 4.6, and he was not good, especially with the route depths. Rick Spielman brought that up. Mike Zimmer brought that up, that he really struggled with those. So is there going to be anything else there? I think they will give him a shot, but I also think we'll find out in free agency here what they think. If they bring in a couple of veteran wide receivers, guys with experience, I mean, you could be talking about him as the 5th wide receiver going into training camp. Did we cut TJ Clemmings? No. Have not cut TJ Clemmings. I don't believe that Shamar Stefon will ever be reliable as a starter. I think he, as a mix-it-in type of guy or has to play a game, I think he's okay. But if he has to play 16 games, I think you're in a lot of trouble. What positions would you fill first in the draft? No, it's a deep draft, especially, running back and defense. Could you wait till the 4th, 5th round? How far will Mixon fall? Well, I don't know how far Mixon is going to fall. I think those are the hardest things to predict when you're talking about a player who has the character issues, which is just labeled for everybody. A guy can smoke a little pot or punch a girl, and they're labeled as character issues. With Mixon, though, he could drop pretty far, or he's talented enough where he could be a second-round pick or something like that. I think this draft is so deep with running backs that he probably goes pretty far. He might go to the 4th or 5th, but that is purely a guess on my part. What was the other part of the question here? What position would I fill first in the draft? Well, I think what I'm looking for always is there's like a chart, if you made one, that has to sort of match up like that, of like your talent versus your need. It's got to be somewhere in the middle. And they do need a running back, and there's lots of talent there. But if one of the tackles were to fall into the 2nd round, or let's just say this week at the Combine, one of these guards just becomes a monster. I don't know. He just really shows up and is great. Well, maybe you could be talking about taking a guard there if that's a position that they're interested in taking in the 2nd round. Maybe that doesn't answer the question very well. I guess I'm kind of thinking about it and talking at the same time. Running back comes to mind first for me. Whoa. A little lightning there. Maybe I shouldn't be near the window. I want to show off for you all Lucas Oil Stadium out there, but if I'm going to get struck by lightning, maybe that's a bad plan. Anyway, so running back comes to mind first, but offensive line is hugely necessary, not to just build for this year, but for the future and going forward. Patterson at running back. Love the question. I love this question. I wrote about this a while ago when somebody told me that Patterson would be open to it. And then he later said that in some interviews. But when I had heard earlier this year that Patterson was down for it, I thought, I love it. I love that idea. If it were me, I would look at the wide receivers and running backs as just playmakers and line them up wherever you have to line them up to get them the ball. For some guys, obviously, you're Larry Fitzgerald, that's a wide receiver, so you're never going to put him at running back. But there are guys who are kind of in the middle. There's one to watch in the draft, Curtis Samuel, who's kind of in the middle, that he's kind of a running back, kind of a wide receiver, played both at Ohio State. I like having those guys on the team and lining them up wherever you can, because the defense never knows where they're going to be, and they can make plays from anywhere. So Cordarrelle Patterson is a full-time running back? Probably not. At running back way more often? Yes. I would love to see him at running back way more often. Thoughts on Clemmings, though? I don't think that Clemmings has much of an NFL future, to be honest. I don't know that for sure, because some guys can get better, but I think the way he played last year, it would be a big shock if he ended up having a long NFL career, I think. I think most guys that play that way don't stay in the league very often. Let's see here. Why don't they use Patterson how the Chiefs use Tyreek Hill? I'm with you. Yeah, I agree. Taylor Gabriel for the Atlanta Falcons, same thing. They use him out of the backfield sometimes, out of the slot. They'll occasionally run him deep, just run him straight by somebody. I would like to see Cordarrelle Patterson back for that reason. And that's why I liked how he was used a little bit in the offense this year. Sitting him on the bench was absurd. I mean, now, like in hindsight, after what he did last year, sitting him on the bench for a full season is crazy with the way that he can make plays. They give him an end around against the Lions. He gets 22 yards. Using him more in that running game would make a lot of sense. Using him exclusively in the screen game, for me, that just allows your opponents to say, okay, well, we know you're going to have a screen every time that he's out there. And every once in a while they would run him deep, but screen after screen after screen just says, well, that's the only thing that the guy's going to do when he's out on the field. And I think it allows you to become a little bit predictable. Let's see here. Not directly, this is from Nathan, not directly Vikings related anymore, but where does AP sign? Where does he finish his career? It's a great question, Nathan, thank you. I think there's a couple of front runners. One of them would be Oakland. Another one might be Tampa Bay. The New York Giants have, I guess, been out there because Adrian Peterson himself put them out there. But I say don't sleep on that idea of him going to Dallas. I think he's always wanted to play for the Dallas Cowboys, and I think what Adrian Peterson might find as he goes around to teams and his agent goes around to teams, what he might end up finding is nobody's going to be willing to make him a 300 carry back. And so he might say, look, if I'm going to be a backup somewhere, why not have it be in Dallas to Ezekiel Elliott? And let's say he gets 100 carries and 500 yards. Let's just say he has a really good year behind that offensive line. So 100 and something carries, 500 something yards, handful of touchdowns, and Dallas uses him as a run-the-clock-out guy when they're up in the fourth quarter. Like, it could work that way. I think it could work that way, and everyone could be happy. He'd be on a winning team. He wouldn't have to carry the load. As long as they felt like he wasn't going to start demanding that he's the number one and Ezekiel Elliott's the number two, as long as that wasn't going to happen, I think that could be a fit. So I'll pick that. I know that's maybe not the favorite, but I'll go with that. I don't think the Green Bay wants him. Or they shouldn't, I don't think. With Ty Montgomery, and if they bring back Eddie Lacy, I think that's a better choice than it would be to sign Adrian Peterson. I know Green Bay's name has been out there. Let's see. What would you think about the Vikings making a splash, bringing in Hightower to, I assume you mean shore up the linebackers? Brandon, it's an interesting idea, and the linebacker thing has been bouncing around my head quite a bit because of Anthony Barr's struggles. I think you can only play two in today's NFL for the majority of the time. That your base package ends up being the nickel because so many teams are running out there 3 wide receivers and versatile tight ends. Eric Kendricks is solid, but unless you're going to switch to a 3-4 or move Anthony Barr into a pass rusher role, pure pass rusher role, then there probably wouldn't be room for Hightower, though he's a great player and I have a lot of respect for him. I'm actually surprised that New England isn't going to keep him around. New England is kind of the kings of, we let everybody go who's good and we just have Brady and survive anyway. But Hightower is a heck of a player, so I am a little surprised to see that they're going to let him walk. The linebacker thing is fascinating. I mean, let's say you did that. Let's say you went to a 3-4, you move Anthony Barr to an outside linebacker position, you bring in Hightower, and now you've got Hightower and Kendricks. That's pretty interesting. But I don't know if it's realistic. I think my guess is that they stay with just Kendricks and Barr. But I think they should be toying around with almost anything to figure out either what happened with Barr and fix it or make a change there to improve his play because it was problematic last year for sure. Let's see. What might Pat Shurmur change up in the offensive scheme? Can you hear this? Can you guys see this back here? Jeez. in the offensive scheme going on into next year? That's a really good question. I think one thing is more play action, man. If you look up the numbers, Football Outsiders has this, that the Vikings were one of the best in the league in play action last year, which is like, what? How were they one of the best when they couldn't run the ball and they couldn't block for Sam Bradford? But I think Sam Bradford's really good at it. I think he's actually bizarrely really good at throwing on the move when they can get him moving left or right. If you go back and you watch the end of the Dallas game on Thursday night, how good Sam Bradford was throwing when he was on the move toward the end of that game was really mind-blowing. And the game to watch is the Jaguars game, where they used a ton of play action and a ton of interesting schemes up front to have the line moving left or right and having Bradford moving a little bit himself during that game. So I'd like to see more of that. I like to see more of the play action there. And if they bring Cordarrelle Patterson back, like we talked about a little earlier, more of him in every role possible, more of Jerick McKinnon in every role possible. And here's another thing. Get rid of the 3rd down and 1 I form. Let it go. It's gone. It's dead. We left it in 1994. Move along. Sam Bradford throwing in 3rd and short, 4th and short situations was pretty good last year. So I'd prefer to see them throw the ball. I'd prefer to see them do some quarterback sneaks. Getting pretty serious out there, I guess. Anyway, I would prefer to see them just totally trash that. In fact, the I-form in general. I wouldn't be surprised if there isn't a fullback next year. I was looking at Zach Line and his snaps from last year after Pat Shurmur took over. Really only one game did he see a lot of snaps under Pat Shurmur. So it wouldn't surprise me if they go entirely to the shotgun and go away from having a fullback in there very often. But use McKinnon more, and if they bring back Patterson, use Patterson more as well. Get those playmakers involved as much as possible in any way possible. Let's see here. Will Treadwell be targeted more often this season, Travis? Thank you for the question, Travis. I'm really interested to find out the answer to that question myself, and I think a lot of it will depend because he's going to work in the offseason. He's been Instagramming everyone that, his work ethic and everything else, but everybody works hard in the offseason in the NFL. It's about whether you can make adjustments necessary to play in the league, and that's the thing that I'll be interested to see when he plays with Sam Bradford for entire training camp. Can they get him on the same page? Because I don't think he's a horrendous route runner. Okay, I know, it was one catch, but the catch against Detroit was a very nice route. He got in and out of it fast, and when I asked Mike Zimmer about it toward the end of the year, about Treadwell, he said he thinks he can get in and out of his routes fast and get open and make plays on the ball. So I would expect if he's 100% healthy and he could start to get on the same page with some of the route depths and things like that, and maybe just come in with a little bit of a different attitude from I'm a first-round pick, I'm entitled to something, and have an attitude that he's got to learn and earn that spot, then I do think we'll see more of him. But we'll know for sure whether they really believe in Treadwell or not, based on if they sign a bunch of people in free agency, if they bring in a ton of competition, or if they say, all right, that number 4 spot is yours, you can move up, you can earn more playing time. We'll see. So he is one of the most interesting storylines going into the offseason and training camp next year, Laquan Treadwell, because usually you draft a wide receiver that high, you at least get more than one catch out of him. Let's see. Realistically, as of today, our wild card chances division championship. This is a monsoon. Can you people see this out here? Look at this. This is nuts. Get a little nervous here. All right, sorry about that. Realistically, the chances of the wild card and division championship. I think that this should be a competitive team again. But you might end up being in the same spot that you were last year, where if the ball bounces one way, a couple of games here or there, you are out of the playoffs. If it bounces a couple, this way or that way, a couple of times, you're in. It's that little sliver of a difference between a 9-7 team or 7-9 team. And one is in and one is out. And that's where I think this Vikings team is right now. Unless something serious changes with the quarterback they have, with the defense they have, which is really good, but I don't think it's unbelievably good. I don't think it's Denver of the last 2 years. I think it's just pretty good. That's where you're at. I don't see a team that's 12-4 or a team that's 4-12. You're somewhere in the middle, which to me would give decent chances at the division, at maybe a 10-6 or 11-5 even, if things went their way, and a good chance to wild card. I would say they have a good chance to be a wild card team next year. Let's see here. Can I comment on Alshon Jeffrey potentially being a candidate in free agency? Yeah, that's an interesting idea that I've seen brought up. And if you look at the wide receiver crop, it's Alshon Jeffrey and then a lot of, who's that guy, right? Kenny Stills, right? Who? So Alshon Jeffrey is the guy, which makes me think that he's going to get paid so much that the Vikings won't even be in that conversation. I think their main goal should be re-signing Adam Thielen and then adding one more receiver who's a veteran, somebody who's been out there. And I'm really interested to find out, and we never did find out really, whether Jarius Wright can become a part of the offense again or if he is just non-existent. But Alshon Jeffrey, I would be very surprised if they were going to spend that much money to bring in a guy of his caliber. At the wide receiver position anyway. Might be an interesting idea to bring in a tight end, another tight end, and have some 2 tight end sets, one guy who might be able to stretch the field a little. It's a thought. Any hope for the German wide receiver? He was I got to tell you, Moritz Boehringer looked a little behind the NFL game when I saw him out there in warm-ups and practice. He did not look at all polished. He's a big human being, though. Any hope? Yeah, maybe, but I wouldn't say it's a high percentage chance that ends up working out. You're rolling the dice. You're taking a long shot on a guy who has some really interesting physical skills, is very big, is very strong, but I don't think he knows really how to play NFL wide receiver yet. Maybe we see a lot of progress from him coming into next year, and he starts to get it a little bit, and maybe starts to get in the game a bit. Maybe putting him at a tight end position might be intriguing with his size. He's very big and very strong. So I wouldn't completely count it out, but I also would not put any money down that he's going to be any type of significant contributor. Does Danielle Hunter become a starter this upcoming season? Will he split time again? I would not expect that he would split time again. I think that Danielle Hunter is 100% a starter. I also think he's a star. This year he's 5th in the NFL in sacks, but even going beyond that, when you go back and look at the games, I think he was a better run stopper than people gave him credit for because they were focused so much on his pass rushing. He's become one of the better players at his position, and I would be all for him starting 90% of snaps, and then if it's Brian Robison, still having him fill in occasionally, but that's it. Being like him and Everson all the time. Let's see here. Read that Latavius Murray would be a free agent running back. Would it be worth going after him or possibly trade for Tennessee Henry? Is Tennessee Henry like an author? Sorry, that's just like a bad joke. Latavius Murray, though, I'm interested in Latavius Murray as a running back option for the Vikings. I think, I mentioned this a little earlier, I think that what they should be looking for is 3-headed monster, and all 3 heads are cheap, as opposed to one superstar running back or superstar that they give the ball all the time and he plays all the time. I like what Oakland did last year with their 3 running backs, and I'd like to see the Vikings do the same thing. Murray is big, but he can catch a little bit. He can pound. He's a big, strong guy. So mixing his skill set with McKinnon and one other guy that they draft, I like that idea. Charles Johnson was pretty non-existent last year. Yes, I agree with you there. Johnson had some interesting things to say when I chatted with him at Winterfest, or I guess the Twin Cities media chatted with him, that he feels like Pat Shurmur gave him some more opportunities, and he's kind of interested to see where that could go. He's a part-time receiver. He's a guy that should be filling in, not a guy who you should rely a ton upon, but I think he can be helpful in that way, as like your number 5 guy that steps up when there's an injury. Thielen versus Diggs, that's a good question. Well, two different receivers, but with a lot of similarities, if that makes any sense. Diggs gets open and Thielen gets open. They both get open with their footwork and with their route running ability. Watching it back on tape, it's extremely impressive. Their footwork, their ability to leverage their cornerback and make moves and get open. Both have great hands. I mean, how many passes did they drop last year? Right off the top of my head, I can't think of many. I can think of a punt that Adam Thielen dropped, but I can't think of many drops that came from Stefon Diggs or Adam Thielen. Thielen's got a little more strength to his game, and Diggs has a little more shiftiness. Diggs can be a little more underneath, but I think they're kind of similar and both very, very good. But maybe Thielen would be on the stronger side than Diggs, and he'll use his strength to go up and get it sometimes. But both of them, I think, can go down the field even more than they did this year. Thielen did it more than Diggs, but I could see them, if they could block a little better, and Sam Bradford does have a good deep ball, that could be a bigger part of the offense this year. How can we improve the offensive line? Well, that's an hour chat on its own, isn't it? I think the Crib Notes version of how the Vikings can improve their offensive line starts with getting 2 tackles in free agency, then making a decision on whether you want Joe Berger to be a center or a guard. I don't think you can spend big money on all 3 positions, 2 tackles and a guard. I just don't think there's enough money to do that and fill some of the other needs that they have. So pick 2. Maybe you get one of the top guards and a good right tackle, and you bring Matt Khalil back at something reasonable. Maybe you draft a guard that you feel like can plug and play, though I'm not huge on that decision if that's the way they go. I'm not huge on plugging in a second-round guard right away. And then you sign 2 tackles for big money. There's lots of different ways they can go, but if Russell Okung is willing to come to Minnesota, I like that idea for a left tackle. Rick Wagner's a guy they'll look at. Riley Reif is a guy they'll look at too. There's a few more options at the right tackle. But I think just in general, they'll draft a couple of guys that might be futures, but you're looking at having to fill at least 2 out of those 3 spots in free agency. Make or break year for Spielman. I'm going to say yes on the make or break year for Spielman. What does he have to do to have his job? I think it's making the playoffs is what he has to do. No question for me, they have to make the playoffs or his job's going to be in jeopardy because he's had time to build this thing up. Especially, now it could really be on if he brings back Adrian Peterson and then that falls apart. Then it's really on him. But I think it's make the playoffs. I think 1 playoff win in the entire time he's been a GM has not been good enough. All right, one more question here. What do we got? If the Vikings don't go offensive line or running back in round 2, what players might be options there? Tight end. I like that idea. I don't think cornerback because they've drafted 2 cornerbacks in the last 2 years. Tight end, I like that idea. Kyle Rudolph is a kind of a possession tight end, but if you can have a guy who can stretch the field a little bit like Martellus Bennett did for New England this year, or as you know, Rob Gronkowski has done for a long time, but a second option tight end, I really like that idea. All right. Thank you. All of you, internship opportunities, email me, Matthew Coller at Gmail. Any of you can email me. We're all friends here. But hey, thank you all for jumping in, for having this conversation. Really enjoyed all the great questions, phenomenal stuff. I'm going to get out of this storm here because I'm kind of afraid I'm going to get hit by lightning. So thank you all, and we will catch you next time. I'll be doing this again during the time that I'm here at the NFL Combine from Indianapolis. So see you all later.